The Crinoline era created subtle shifts for men's fashions. The cult of respectability placed a great deal of importance on a man's ability to look like a pillar of society, dependable and logical, with a strong work ethic. Men have stepped away from showy fashions, leaving most displays of wealth to the women of their family. The color black will push most other colors off the stage, particularly for frock coats. Men change their shape from the drooping round shapes of the Romantic era to a solid rectangular shape. There will be little emphasis on the waist. The waist will raise from an elongated ideal to the shorter waist, with the bottom of the vest sitting just above the natural waist. The coat and vest collar no longer stand up behind the head, now laying flat on the shoulder. Vests or waistcoats kept their lapels. Vests were either single or double-breasted. Men begin dressing alike, with only the extremely wealthy and aristocratic man confident enough to break the rules or live above the rules. One thing we can observe in photographs is that when dress equalizes, subtle differences become more important. During this era, men appear to pour their individuality into their facial hair. We will see an astonishing array of sideburns, mustaches, and beard shapes that had not been seen in Western fashion since the medieval era. As a matter of fact, costume historians found it significant when young men revived these beards and facial hair fashions for the 2000s. Just as women had a signature garment in the crinoline era, men have a signature item. The tall stovepipe top hat was a sign of authority, worn by factory owners, wealthy men, bankers, and gentlemen during the day and with formal wear. I find it interesting that hat imitated the shape of factory chimneys. In the crinoline era, the sides of the hat are straight, in contrast with the curved-sided top hat of the prior Romantic era. Men wore underdrawers made of flannel in winter or cotton in summer. They could be full length or shorter. One new innovation was knitted underwear, which could stretch with movement. Later in this era, men could wear a union suit of drawers and undershirt combined. These combinations were worn for warmth. The flat front shirt is now standard, often with some kind of pleat to lend stiffness. These required stiff starch to stay in perfect shape. The wrapped cravat shrinks to a flat bow during this era. Men's shirts were easy to mass manufacture, so we see shirt makers advertising many unique styles to appeal to customers. Small ruffles and embroidery are available for men who wish to make a subtle fashion statement. Shirts are slimmer in the body now than before to fit under the waistcoat. With a more fitted shirt, slits were cut into the sides at the bottom so men could sit comfortably. A variety of collar styles are visible in photos and fashion plates. The standing collar that covers the cheeks will transition away as plain standing collars or fold collars rose in popularity. Detachable collars become widely available. The collar often shows dirt before the rest of the shirt, so the collar was made separately for more frequent changing and cleaning. The button fly front is now standard in trousers, especially with the rise of mass-manufactured menswear during the Civil War. Mass manufacture will also bring the standardization of the left over right rule for menswear buttoning. The trousers on the left have a very deep underlap under the fly, although that is not always the case. Trousers were built higher at the waist in the back. This ensured the trouser fit nicely over the rear end and kept the trouser from slipping down. Notice how this trouser is manufactured. While there were variations, this is a pretty typical example. This is how men's trousers will be made for many decades. The waistband is a separate strip of fabric sewn at the top, and we can see suspender buttons sewn on the outside. Suspenders are now a standard way to keep trousers up in the correct position. I love this photo of a working man who preserved for all of us what he looked like in his knitted undershirt and suspenders. Because he is rakish enough not to appear in his waistcoat, we can see how high men's trousers sat on the stomach. The top of the trouser would slide under the vest to stay neatly in place. In the back of the trouser, we can see three distinctive traits. The waistband breaks in the back to leave a V shape. The second feature is the triangles of fabric sewn in the back. That is what makes the trouser taller in back, as you can see at the profile view on the right. The third feature is the pocket construction. The pockets are built into the side seam, visible only as a slit. The front of the trouser fits smoothly, so any pockets built into the front were only very small to keep watches. When we recreate this period of trouser, it can be a great trick to add this piecing to the top of contemporary trousers to make them look more period correct. Men with proper social standing took great care never to appear in public without a full suit. This suit still consists of three pieces: coat, waistcoat, and trousers. The three pieces do not have to match during the day. This image is a good view of the frock coat with waist seam dropped just below the natural waist and slits cut into the back skirt. It is more slender than the Romantic era, and notice the fiddleback seams in the back of the coat remain. Trousers are straight-legged and touch the top of the shoe. A second coat style popular in the 1850s and 1860s is the morning coat or cutaway. This looks like a cross between a frock coat and a tailcoat. The distinguishing hallmark of a morning coat is the front curves back below the waist. Compare this to the tailcoat at right. The tail cuts squarely back to form the tail. The tailcoat is passing out of fashion for day wear and will be mostly worn for evening formal wear. The morning coat then will be worn for more formal occasions during the day, such as a daytime wedding or business. The morning coat or cutaway also has a seam at the waist, just like the frock and tailcoats do. The man on the left shows individual expression with his subdued plaid waistcoat and trouser fabrics. Plaid trousers were popular with very fashionable men about town. Men wore gloves outside the house, and a light golden yellow color was the most popular. In the 1860s, large lapels come into style on waistcoats and coats. They reach about halfway to the shoulder on the coat or wider in overcoats. Let's look at the anatomy of a coat collar and lapel. The collar is the top portion that goes behind the neck. In the Romantic era, we saw this collar stood up behind the neck to frame the face. Beginning in the 1850s, this collar shrinks to a small size and it hugs the neck only very slightly in the back. The lapel is the part that lays on the chest. It is sewn to the collar with a seam, which you can see here. Note this lapel has one vestigial buttonhole left over from Napoleon's tailoring details. During this period, we will see better made suits, particularly frock coats and tailcoats and overcoats, feature an inset or triangular piece of fabric sewn into the lapel. This is extra work and makes the coat more distinctive. This is one of those subtle signals that tells you this is an expensive suit. Lapel styles will vary during this period. The two most common are the peak lapel and the notch lapel, which men still wear today. The peak lapel describes how the collar and lapel meet. The point formed by the lapel on the bottom is larger than the point formed by the collar on the top. The notch lapel shows both collar and lapel points are roughly the same size. In the 1850s, the Chesterfield collar was particularly fashionable. It is a velvet collar attached to a regular wool lapel. This is a good opportunity to compare the details of the 1850s to the 1860s. The 1850s collar at top center is taller, and the cravat wraps all the way around the neck. All the other examples on this slide are from the 1860s. We see shorter collars, many of them wearing a style that folds down, just like a dress shirt today. In the 1860s, the cravat shrinks to a smaller bow tie. The details of a man's coat is still inspired by military wear with extra buttonholes, although those will begin to fade away during this period. Note the way the coat sleeve is made. There is a seam attaching a cuff with buttons. This detail will be an important one for better menswear, especially frock and tailcoats. Men's sleeves are also made in two vertical parts, so there's a long seam down the front and the back. This creates a better fitting sleeve and is a hallmark of tailoring. Evening wear has solidified in this era to black and white only. The black tailcoat is worn with matching black trousers, and the trousers often have a decorative braid sewn down the side, another remainder from military wear. Fashion plates show a choice of black or white waistcoat. The formal waistcoat is cut very low on the chest, showing a fancy front shirt with small ruffles and other decorations like embroidery. The only tie worn with this ensemble is a white bow tie, even if the waistcoat is black. This style is still worn, and it is what we call white tie. So if you receive an invitation that says white tie, that is a shortcut term meaning a tailcoat. Tailcoats from this period are shown with either a peak lapel or a notch lapel. Note the jacket does not close across the front, but still uses buttons. The buttons are black, covered in silk fabric. There is a cuff seam, and the tails are blunt or slightly rounded. As men's business suits codify into a few choices, their wardrobes will expand to include much more specialty clothing. This is where men are allowed to express themselves, and it is an important part of conspicuous consumption. The wealthy set themselves apart by stipulating many changes of clothing during the day, as well as for every kind of event or activity. The men on the right are wearing knickerbockers, a new sports trouser gathered into a band below the knee for hunting or golf. The sack coat is a new style starting in the 1850s. It's shorter, worn to the top of the thigh or to mid-thigh. This coat does not have a waist seam. It begins as a sporting jacket for hunting or other athletics and rapidly enters men's daily wardrobes because it is more comfortable to wear. It will be widely adopted by working and middle-class men. The sack coat, or lounge suit as it is called in England, will not be suitable for serious occasions yet. The fledgling ready-to-wear business in the United States was given a huge boost by the Civil War. Overnight, orders were placed for millions of uniforms. The measurement system we use today is a result of this effort, using hundreds of thousands of men's measurements taken for the war. Europe will not establish as large of a ready-to-wear industry yet, and our ability to mass manufacture men's clothing will lead to some large differences in the way Americans dress. There was not a tradition of Savile Row or haute couture designers emerging in the United States as it did in Europe. So manufacturers themselves hired designers who were more subject to cost effectiveness and sales numbers than a couture designer would be. Manufacturers published fashion plates, and customers went to a man's haberdasher or supplier to try on different models. This system would lead to a lot of variety in ready-to-wear clothing as each manufacturer developed their own looks. Several price points were available. A better quality suit would take longer to make than a cheaper suit that was made by cutting corners. Wealthy men continued to patronize a custom tailor. Outer coats for men reflected the occasion and the personality of the wearer. This Chesterfield coat, with a velvet collar, remains the most formal and respectable. It was much favored by businessmen, and if you look very closely at this photograph, you can see he is wearing a frock coat under his Chesterfield coat. The Inverness coat was a bit more dashing and protected in bad weather or travel. There are no sleeves in this coat. There's a long slit on the sides to push your arms through. The cape protects the arms and shoulders from rain. Our textbook lists several other styles of coat as well, and men continue to wear capes as a dressy or formal outerwear. Men's hair will transition during this era away from the curly square shapes of the 1840s to flat hairstyles. The family photo on the right shows a generational difference. Dad, who is seated on the left, wears the older square style with curls over the ears, and his son, standing at the right, sports the new flat hairstyle. Some of the signature styles of facial hair include mutton chops or extreme sideburns. We will see a number of beard shapes and mustaches. The variety will be so amazing, and in some cases alarming, that there are a number of websites dedicated to men's facial hair from the Victorian era. Men had the option of wearing a less formal coat at home, the lounge coat. These garments usually show the influence of Turkish robes as part of the Victorian fascination with that culture. One great detail to notice is the proper way to put a top hat on a table, seen in the back of the photo at the right. The hat is laid on its flat crown so as not to flatten the curved brim. Men's shoe styles resemble many styles still worn today. The flat slippers from the Romantic era will freeze as formal wear shoes worn only with formal black tailcoats in the evening. Oxford styles that lace across the instep are worn for day wear and some sports activities. Men also have the choice of ankle boots for day wear, some with new elastic insets to help the foot slide in. Shoes are made from leather with decorative piecing and contrast colors available. Heels are flat, about 1 inch high. Men's hat styles continue from the Romantic era. A new hat that will become ubiquitous from now through the 1920s is the bowler hat, called a derby in the U.S. This is the hallmark of middle-class respectability, bankers, office workers, small business owners. It has a rounded dome crown and a brim that curves up at the sides. Wide brim hats continue to be worn more widely in the US than Europe, with low crowns. We now call some of these styles planter hats or gambler hats. A signature American hat begins during this time, the Stetson. While traveling in the West, John Stetson noticed the popularity of wide-brimmed hats, and he created a high-quality version. Cowboys quickly adopted this hat because of its durability. The original Stetson hat was this style, now named Boss of the Plains. Working men's hats remain the same from the 1840s, with the addition of more wide-brim hats as they become available. Before we leave our study of men's garments, it's interesting to note the 25 or so women that we know who fought in the Civil War disguised as men, and there may be many more we don't know about. One was an undercover spy. One fought for both the North and the South. Several dressed as men to join their husbands in the battlefield. One interesting case is Albert J. Cashiers, who was born female, lived as a man for his entire adult life, and maintained that identity until he died. When the Civil War started, Albert enlisted. His gender identity was not questioned for the entire war, and a few doctors along the way kept his secret apparently. Now that we have a better understanding, contemporary scholars wonder if he was a trans man who had been assigned the female gender at birth. This gives us an exciting new area of research to document how trans people have taken part in all aspects of the human story. Cathay Williams dressed as a man just to enlist. She passed a military entrance physical and hospitalization for smallpox without being discovered. She is now considered to be the first black woman to have enlisted in the U.S. Army. After the war, she returned to women's clothing and lived in Colorado. Later in life, when she fell seriously ill, the U.S. Army honored her pension payments, as there had been several legal precedents of paying disguised women for fighting in the Civil War as men. That concludes our study of men's garments in the Crinoline era. During this time, from 1850 through the 1860s, all the elements of the traditional male wardrobe are now established, with the addition of the sack coat. And we saw that men continue to wear many elements from the Crinoline era today.